And now, a word from our sponsors. The Oyster Recovery Partnership is the nonprofit expert in Chesapeake Bay oyster restoration. Oyster Recovery Partnership has planted more than 9 billion oysters on 3,000 acres of reef and recycled more than 250 bushels of shell. Everyone benefits from a healthy Chesapeake Bay. Poor water quality and declining habitats can be reversed. Oysters are the answer. Pescavore is packaged in a convenient single serving size with no refrigeration required until after opening. Pescavore is the perfect, healthy, and delicious snack for those on the go. Pescavore, tuna that travels. Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your oyster ninja. I'm here today with the host of Wildlife Wonders, a new podcast, focusing on wildlife wonders. And so Miss Seriana Gamble, like the money. Um, how you feel today?
I'm doing good, and you?
I'm great. I'm great. It's good to see first of all, people of color in nature and, you know, educating. So that's why, of course, I had to bring you on the show and let other people find about the great things that you're doing out here.
Yeah, for sure. You don't see a lot of minorities or specifically people of color talking about animals, actually enjoying animals and sharing that joy with the world. So definitely something I'm trying to bring more awareness to.
So let's just start there. Like, where are you from and how did you find your interest in nature and wildlife?
Okay, well, I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. Used to be a smaller town, but now it's growing so much it's not considered small anymore. But it's a town in the upper side of South Carolina. I was born there. I have moved around so much. So I have been throughout many states, mostly on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and also I used to live in the islands. So there's that. I've been in North Carolina now, probably for a good long haul. But my love of animals was started on its own when I was little. Instantly, I lived near a big backyard, or big, I said backyard, it was woods in my backyard. And so we got a lot of wildlife that just kind of came onto our property. So that was one, I went outside a lot and exploring the outside and exploring near the woods or the creek. My uncle enjoyed fishing, so going fishing with him, which I know is kind of the opposite of loving wildlife when you're catching it, but still. And then we also had like cows up the street, which, of course, I didn't go over the fence and go play with them, but it's also, I was surrounded by wildlife. I was in the South. You see people sometimes with farms and animals all the time. I had dogs, I had cats, all those animals. So that was where it started. It kind of flourished from there. Whenever I saw any kind of animal hurt, I would go save it, take it home, like you're coming in with me, kind of try to like nurse it back to health. My family hated it because it's like you can't just bring in everything from the outdoors. We had a raccoon once that ended up having rabies, but we didn't know it had rabies when we caught it until the next day. My papa said, "Oh, you have to let it loose." So we let it loose, and next thing you know, it was like doing this little ticking thing and going around the log.
Oh
I'm like,
no.
"Oh, something's wrong with it. That's crazy." And then so yeah, I told somebody, it's like, I think it has rabies, and it was a whole ordeal. But yeah, we had it for a whole like day and a half before I guess it started showing. So kind of lucky we didn't get bit. We were feeding it weenies like through the cage we caught it through. No problems. It didn't try to bite us in. So who knows? But that was lucky, knock on wood, that happened and didn't end up worse. So it's like kind of small experiences like that kind of pushed me towards it. As I got older, I am going to say this: when I was younger, I didn't know many Black people that really like animals as much as I do, and beyond dogs and the cats, or their own dogs and cats. And so often I was told, like, "Oh, she did that white people stuff." I don't know if I can say that, but she did that white people stuff, or like, "Oh, this is different. This is, I don't know where this is going." For the longest, my family thought I was going to be a veterinarian. And I thought at some point until I saw some of my animals die, and I was like, I can't handle this. This ain't gonna work. I had burnt down. So I was like, nope.
Yeah,
Um,
because you actually did like what, like some internship or something with some vets?
So funny enough, I've been a vet assistant 3 times now, I think. 2 times, 3 times. I've worked in a surgical area doing spay and neuters. We also did some cyst removal. They did dental, and then they do preventative care. So I did that, but that was recently within the last year. So that wasn't until I got a lot older. And I actually handled that a lot better than I thought I would. But regardless, still a little bit of euthanizing still kind of bothered me. I've also done traveling vet tech. I've worked in a lab with mice, pigs, ferrets, and I also worked in the other lab with fishes and toads and frogs as well. So I've worked with a lot of different animals in different backgrounds of all kind of different types, but I've worked at a sanctuary before, worked in a lot of different animal places, but I learned this later on in life. But sorry for all the sounds, my computer and everybody else going off. But I learned this later on in life. And by the time I learned this, I was already in college. I was already an adult. I wish I would have learned it earlier in my childhood. So, hey, like, even though you're young, you can go volunteer at a farm or go volunteer at a sanctuary, or like you can even rehab. Didn't find this out till later on. You can rehab animals in your home and release it. And you don't have to be a specific age for that. You can be a teenager and do that, but you just have to have a parent or someone around to approve it or help you. But I really wish I would have learned these things earlier on. And when I talk to people in the field, particularly people that are not minorities, they've done these things, or they're already a step ahead because they've experienced this, or their school program had, which mine did not, none of my programs had like pre-vet programs or animal care programs, or they had animal experiences within the school, or able to go out and shadow at a young age. And it's kind of crazy because I feel like that's where we are limited. And maybe that's why a lot of minorities don't, not having this exposure early and taught fear early kind of taints the line for later down the road. So yeah, I had a lot of experiences, but a lot of them didn't start till after high school.
Man, that's really interesting. I'm just, thinking while you're talking, like, is this a funding issue or is this just like you said, a lack of exposure issue? I mean, I know this is past us, but I don't know if you've had any experience like talking with the educational systems or anything.
I have not spoken with educational systems about this. I feel like some of it is just funding area and interest. If we don't express interest in this area, why would they put in the school?
Gotcha.
Kind of thing. And I feel like generationally looking at it, there are reasons for fear for dogs and cats, going back to slavery, going back to the times where they use as weapons sometimes. So I understand it, but I feel like, again, in the family's not showing enough interest, like, hey, let's take these animals to a farm, or teaching like this wildlife is okay to hold and okay to look at. That's part of it. Also, people don't think when you have animals, you have to have some type of money. Um, so that's why you don't see a lot of lower class with animals, or if you do see lower class with animals, they might have dogs and cats, but they're not well taken care of sometimes. They're not taken to the vet regularly. They stay outside, or they're used as guard animals. The same thing when I was in Costa Rica, a lot of people are poor in the area I was in. A lot of them had dogs and cats, but unfortunately, they were not well taken care of at all. But they use it for protection. So I think that's where the issue comes to, is like it takes money to do these things. It does take money to go to the zoo. Although, if anybody listening has government assistance, I think food stamps, a lot of the zoos you can get a discount or free ticket if you go to zoos and aquariums and stuff like that. But just side note. Um, but it takes money to do these things. So I think that's also why sometimes middle class is cut off from these experiences, because you need money. And I think that's also why bad experience come with some people with animals, because when you have animals that's not well taken care of, or they're not trained, or indoor people have experience where they've been attacked or barked at, or the animal has expressed some bad behavior that scared them, because these are not your everyday well taken. These are guard dogs, or these are fight dogs, which is not approved of, but fight dogs, whatever the case may be. Or these animals they caught from outside and they're not legit pets. But yeah, I feel like it's just a mix of all those factors. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the transition for you since you didn't have these things, growing up in school, rather these programs? So what was the transition for you that's like, you know what? This could be a career. This is not just a white thing. This is actually an option for me because I love it.
Yeah, I feel as if my family is very nurturing. Um, I had a little bit of different experience than other people. I did move around a lot. My mom, my grandparents, everybody was very supportive of if whatever I wanted to do kind of thing. It wasn't necessarily because I was also into art. I was never pushed into saying, hey, you have to be an engineer or you have to do this or you have to do that. I was never pushed in that direction. I was kind of fostered whatever you like is what you need to do. Now, in the beginning, my mom did say, hey, that's not going to pay. She did mention that a few times. If you're going to vet school, maybe, but hey, if you're just trying to play with animals in a zoo or whatever, that ain't going to pay. If you're doing research, maybe. But over time, her views and stuff changed. I think that helped. Um, I feel like also everybody goes through the periods of like, what am I going to do? What is this going to happen? And da 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 da. For me, when I first went into college, I didn't know what I was going to do. My degree was exploratory because I was like, I don't know, I'm gonna try different things out. Again, I didn't have these experiences and these exposures before college, so I had never worked professionally in an animal space. I've always picked up animals and did other stuff or had pets, but I didn't know what it was like. Eventually, went into psychology, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna just do psychology after the speech disorder thing kind of failed. So I was like, I like psychology. That's where we're going, and then that's why I stuck with for a little bit, and I end up graduating that. But to go back, at one point, I say, how can I combine my love for people, but also my love for animals? Because I'm also like unmotivated by chemistry. So I was like, vet school's not gonna work for me. So I decided to do primatology, which a lot of people do not know about. It is a thing. There are people that specifically research primates. That's what primatology is. You study primates. So then it became whether I wanted to study them in their natural habitat or I wanted to study them in captivity or research. And all those other questions start flying about. Animal behavior popped up. If people don't want to go to vet school, there's animal behavior, there's you could do zoology, animal science, all those are options beyond just being a veterinarian. Um, so that's kind of what led into the different thoughts and the different fields. In the end, I didn't end up going the route for my doctorate to primatology, but I'm still using animals because right now I'm in a counseling program to eventually do animal assisted therapy with hopefully potentially children, but we haven't worked that out yet. So I'm still using my passion and using that in another way, but there are ways to incorporate what you like into what you can do as a career. You just have to figure it out. It might be different. It might be what people don't know about, but hey, that's what makes it unique.
Okay, that's interesting. So, how did you come to the idea of like, all right, well, I have this love of nature. I have, I'm going to school, doing these different things. I got this psychology, degree, right? And now I want to start a podcast. Like, how does all that add up together?
The podcast, they actually came kind of randomly to me. I think part of it was like, oh, I see everybody else doing a podcast because it's the big thing. Everybody has a podcast now. So that was, I'm gonna be honest, that was part of it. But also like I saw a field that was not covered. When I started to look up stuff, people talk about animals, but most of the time they're white people. To be honest, I don't even see a lot of Asians, Hispanics talking about animals. It's mostly white people. And also, like the more people I spoke to about animal assisted therapy, they didn't know about it. The more people I talked to about primatology specifically, going into that field before I went to Costa Rica was like I was like, I'm going to be the first Black primatologist because there was, from what I can see, there was no Black like at all. I don't know if that's changed, but there was none at all that I could see in the field that did this. Even when I did my internship at the zoo, I didn't see anybody at all that did specifically animal behavior primatology that was Black. Doesn't mean they're not out there, but I couldn't find them at the time. So it was this niche of like, I see there's a need to be filled. I talk to more people. All these people are afraid of animals or don't know about animals, or I talk about animals all the time. So either friends will be like, oh, I didn't know that. That was cool, this, that, and the third. So I was like, I want to start a podcast. No one really talks about animals as Black. And there's a lot of Black people that don't know about animals, or they won't listen. Not to say that they're not, white people don't know what they're talking about, and there's plenty of professional in the field, but sometimes minorities are more likely to listen or tune in to someone that looks and can relate to them. Cause they're like, wait, she doing it or she's saying something about it. Maybe it's some of us out there. Maybe it's possible that like I'm not alone in my interests and stuff like that. So I just saw different needs that need to be filled. And that's kind of, okay, this could work. This might be something that people are interested in. And it's slowly catching on. It's taking a minute, but the ball is slowly rolling and starting to meet a lot of other people that are interested in animals, but also wanting to get more in the animal field and just don't know.
It's cool. You started a podcast. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the struggles first of all. Well, let's I want to talk about that later. What kind of research did you do as far as like starting a podcast? Because I know when I started mine, I kind of, like I told you, I had like a mentor who had like multiple podcasts. He's been doing it since like the beginning of time. So my journey was a little different and a little easier, I think. Of course, I still had to learn how to do the things. He wasn't doing it for me, but like what were you worried about when and granted the podcast is still new, but what were you worried like in the beginning, like as far as like starting a podcast journey?
For me, it was so much stuff. Before I started, of course, finding a niche, exactly what I want to talk about with animals. But I reached out to someone that is he's a videographer, but also does podcasts. And so I reached out to him, asking him questions. I watched video after video of starting a podcast, because it's easy to start one. It's actually like, it's easy to put it up and say, hey, I'm gonna do one. The recording, the editing, all of that was very difficult. It's still very difficult because before this, I did content and stuff on social media, but nothing with editing audio and nothing with like taking out background noise. And if you listen to my podcast, we're slowly getting there, but it's still some work. Uh, Nothing with adding intros and music. And I'm like, mine is still, compared to a lot of people, still very basic. As you see, I only have one video up because that in itself was a stress, to upload a video to YouTube, to add a beginning of it. I'm like, all this is a lot. And I kudos to everybody that are content creators full time. I do have a job. I also am in school and all these other things and all these side hobbies. So it is very time, it takes a lot of your time. It takes a lot, and no one talks about that. Just kind of, I'm trying to get on a schedule of regularly posting and editing and stuff, and trying to schedule out like, hey, I'm recording on Monday or Tuesday, and I'm going to edit this day, and then have it published or scheduled. And in my head, it sounds good. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get 4 weeks done this week. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. So just like learning that, and it takes twice as much time for me to edit versus someone else that has maybe done this already for a year or done this for 6 months or had previous experience editing. So when they started a podcast, it was easy selling.
Yeah.
Just to learn how to go through and clip stuff and take out the noise here, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm not going to even lie. I considered a couple of times early on starting. That was one of my things in the beginning. Am I going to pay somebody to do that? Because I really consider that part. But then when I thought about it, I was like, I don't have enough traction or enough views coming in for me to come out my pocket to immediately do that in the beginning. Now, later on, I'm not opposed to it. But right now, it's like, it's just better, especially if it's smaller and it's getting started, for me to try to do that on my own and figure it out. And just so I know, but it's still a learning curve. It's a huge learning curve. YouTube, Google has been my friend.
How do you come up with your content that you're going to go over in that episode?
So when it comes to most of the episode, I've been going in order, going through the animal classes, so mammals, invertebrates, reptiles, amphibians, going through it. And I did that for 2 cycles for, I guess, the first season. I haven't decided if I'm gonna keep seasons or just name each episode. But and within each episode, I usually go over where they're from, their behavior, mating style, diet, conservation status, and the fun facts at the end. That's the kind of format I've been following. For the intro episode and the episode that you're probably talking about the primates, when I do the intro episode, it's kind of just going over an overview. So the first intro episode to the podcast was, why am I creating this? But also it's like, here are the animal classes. This is the difference between a mammal and the amphibians, because you have to break it down to the basics. Originally, I made this, and still now, I made the podcast for everyone. So I also try to speak in a way that's understandable for kids, but also understandable for people that do not have a science background or do not have an animal background. If I automatically go into all the parts of the brain and the amount of incisors and dental they have, people going to tune out. They're going to, they're like, I don't know what's going on. So I try to simplify it so anybody of any age, of any mental capacity can listen to it. That's the kind of way I do it. You also see me stutter like the last episode. I had a little hesitation because I'm not sure. There's still, again, I'm new. There's still gray areas. I'm not sure if I could have said the word kill and some other words when I'm uploading to YouTube or if I'm uploading to the podcast. I'm not sure if that considers explicit. So I try to, if I have hesitation, I try to find other words that replace words that might seem violent, I guess, in a sense, because I do want it to be for kids as well. So that's kind of the context I do there. For the primate episode, I just really, one thing that like really touches my soul is when people don't know that they call an ape a monkey and like don't know the difference between an ape and a monkey, but I have to reel that back in and like everybody wasn't taught. So that's kind of what the main goal of that episode was, to go over what's the difference between an ape and a monkey and what are primates. Because you could say, oh, we're primates. A lot of people don't know what that is. We're primates, but I have to explain like it's because we have nails, it's because we have thumbs, like that kind of thing, and go through that because you don't want to go into details of an animal and say this is an amphibian like other amphibians, and they'd be like, what the heck is an amphibian? Or this is a primate like other primates, and be like, what does a primate have that's different? So I kind of try to start out with the general information so we know a little background and then go into each animal specifically.
So I think are primates your favorite?
Primates primates are definitely my favorite. I have a really soft spot in my heart for them. I also am obsessed with turtles. I love turtles. Yeah, but primates hold the turtles and goats. Primates hold my special heart though.
So primates, turtles, and goats, like what draws you to these animals? These, what draws you?
For primates specifically, primates are so much like us. That's one big reason. If you ever watch primates, the way they think is complex. They use tools. It's just like on another level. It's very interesting. They form bonds like us. They can practice pro-social behavior just like us, of like grooming or being affectionate or realizing aggression or jealousy. It's kind of like the same concepts that we have, is why I'm very interested in them. They're just very interesting to watch. Also, they're used a lot in research, unfortunately, but they are used a lot in research for different studies and how it applies, how it can be applied to humans. So that, as far as primates, turtles are just cute. They're just really cute and unique. And I just like turtles. They're just adorable. And as far as goats, I've always been obsessed with goats. Disclosure, I want a pet goat in the future. I'm still working on that and trying to convince who I'm staying with that, hey, we can have a pet goat in the future. But I just love goats. I rented a goat during COVID to have at the house, walked around the neighborhood, fed them and everything, because that was
Hold up. That's a thing. What?
well, I was curious, and it was COVID, and we all did dumb, weird stuff during COVID.
I
And
didn't
so
rent a goat though.
I found a farm near me, and like you could do animal rentals. And most of the time it was guinea pigs, hamsters, like rabbits, stuff like that. And I think she did that so people would rent the pet and see how their kids did with it, or see how they did with it before they went and bought a pet, which is smart. Very, very smart. More places should do that because a lot of pets get returned or just donated or given away. But that was her purpose. But she also let you rent a goat. So I took a goat. Usually the goat rentals were for like birthday parties and weddings because people use animals for that, petting zoos or whatever the case may be, field trips, things like that. But I was like, I'm just renting to take it to the house. And she was like, okay, cool. These are the rules. Da, 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 da. It was a baby goat. If you see baby goats are huge, even though they're babies. So she did have this one guideline. I think I had rented it for like 6-8 hours, something like that. But her guideline was that when it started to cry too much or whatever, I needed to bring it back, because then it was probably time. When it started to cry and scream too much, then it was time for her to probably feed. And she wasn't the type of lady that gave you bottles or anything. You had to bring it back so it can come nurse with the mother. So we did have, I think we had she gave us like a bag of snacks or whatever for in between, but he had fed that morning. We had a little dog crate, put him in the car, brought him to the house, let him out. I had a little leash for him, took him around the neighborhood. My mom was not happy because at the time I was staying at my mom's house, she was not happy. She's like, that goat does not come in the house. So he wasn't allowed in the house. I had to stay outside the entire time. I had him in the garage or in the backyard. My siblings were all very interested. It was also to create an interactive experience for my siblings. I have a
Okay.
bunch of younger siblings, so they fed them, pet the goat. We talked about the goat and what is like different details and facts about the goats. And they were really engaged. They got to hold it. They were excited. Like I said, my mom wasn't happy, but hey, we were all interactive and she loved that they were learning something from it. And then yeah, they asked to keep the goat, but it had to go back.
That's actually pretty cool when you put it like that. Well, first of all, I can understand, like for like weddings or
Hmm.
a rapper's photo shoot or
Yeah.
video or something. Uh but no, that's kind of cool. Like you introduced that goat to your, siblings so they have that exposure. So just more exposure, and the more exposure we have is even better.
Yeah, I
Um
definitely I exposed them to a lot of animal stuff growing up just because that was my love. But also I have three brothers and a sister under me. Two of my brothers love animals just as much as I do. And I think part of that I took them to during COVID, outside of COVID, also when the youngest one was a baby. At that time I came back from college and I took care of him full time almost when my mom was working. And so we went to the park, we played with dogs, we went to zoos or the aquariums, we went to petting zoos. And I try to teach them early on just not to have a fear of animals. The same thing, like there was experience where some duck mom got hit and all the ducks were running. We went out there, we caught all the ducks or caught what we could to take them to a sanctuary. So they've definitely had that exposure, ride through zoos. So I would say they're not necessarily afraid of animals, and they've definitely been more exposed than other minority kids probably have.
So before we close up, how can we expose more minorities? And we've talked about a few already, to nature and wildlife and those things.
So there are things, there's so many ways. There's a thing called a forestry school. There might be one in your area. They're actually in a lot of areas are becoming more popular, and it's basically a program for school. You can use it for homeschool kids, but you can also just use it in general for if parents want to get their kids more involved in the outdoors. So basically sign up, they take the kids outdoors or to woods and they explore. They explore the forest, they explore their surroundings, pick up sticks, dig stuff. If they see an animal, talk about it. So that's definitely one way that you can get your kids out there. There's forestry schools. You can have your kid volunteer at local sanctuaries. The one where I rented the goat, it's called Winter Pass Farms. It's near Wake Forest in North Carolina. You can volunteer there. Kids can come there and help brush the animals or feed the animals or cut up fruit or whatever the case may be, social interaction with some of the animals. So there's things like that that's free for kids to volunteer. It's free for adults to volunteer. Like I said, if you are lower income, if you're on government assistance, a lot of the zoos and aquariums have programs where you can go and either go for free or go for really, really cheap, go to the zoo or aquarium. I've known a lot of people that did that and definitely take control of that because zoos have gotten expensive. A lot of them have. So there's programs like that. If you have the funds, hey, you can do like I do and go do research in Costa Rica, or there's different programs that you can do like I guess it's called travel volunteering. There's some pros and cons of that, which I would have to go over at another point. So I don't always promote that. But there's travel volunteer where you can volunteer at sanctuaries or animals or do stuff for the wildlife or all kind of stuff out there. Of course, they cost a little bit more, but there are scholarships and there are fundings that you could do for that. So the biggest thing is just like if you're able to getting pets, getting your kids around pets. If you are scared of animals, try not to show that to your kids because kids learn behavior. They watch you and they learn behavior. So if you're afraid of dogs and a dog come around, try not to scream and shout and run around. Say, I'd rather stay back, but promote your kid to explore that area and see if maybe they're interested in it and maybe they're not as scared as you would be. But if you show that early on before a child even experience that animal, that's why you see a lot of people that are afraid of animals or certain animals and they've never been around them. It's because they've seen other people express a fear or seen the worst in them. So there's all kind of different things like that. It's just exposure, exposure, exposure. Yeah.
So something I did want to bring up earlier, you brought up Costa Rica a few times. So what was the trip to Costa Rica? What was that about?
So I was at the end of my bachelor's. yeah, the last year of my bachelor's degree. And so that summer, because I was determined I was going to be a primatologist, I'm gonna go in my doctorate program. I was like, right after I graduate, I'm going right into PhD. And I thought to myself, and I was like, maybe I should do something to explore this, to make sure this is what I want before I spend another 5 to 7 years of my life in something. So I did a program through, wow, escape my name, El Suerte. It was the Madeiras Rainforest School, or whatever the case may be. You can look it up. Anybody that's listening can look it up. And they have all kind of programs for pre-vet if you just want to study the biology, plant biology. They have primate program. They have a bat, all kind of stuff. You can look at it. And so I was awarded the Gilman Scholarship. I applied for that. That wasn't through them. That's through a national thing you can apply for. So I got the funding there. I found the program, applied. I got in. I got another funding, I think, through them as well. And so I was like, I'm going to Costa Rica. It was to study mantled howler monkeys. That's why I ended up studying for the 3-4 weeks I was there. And you live on site, you stay in the rainforest, you go out every day, do your research, collect data, you present your paper at the end and your findings. They do promote that you publish it or go to a conference and present it there. But I didn't end up doing that. But that's basically what I went to Costa Rica for. And it was there after that trip back, I decided, I was like, yeah, it sounds bad, but I was like, I see why there's not a lot of Black people in this field.
What were some of the negatives about it?
So I guess this is like, one, if you have a medical condition, for me, I do have a medical condition, you have to put in perspective when you do this full time in the field, if you're on medications, once you run out, you don't have access to these medications. There's not the nearest doctor is like an hour or something away if something happens. So you have to deal with that, especially if something that it physically affects you. You're walking for miles and miles. And I mean, my mom told me this before I go, but I'm hard-headed and I had to see for myself. So you're walking for miles and miles and miles through rough terrain. You're getting rained on a lot of times. It's socially kind of draining if you're a social person, because they let you know, like in the actual field, you might only be researching 1 or 2 other people. You might be doing research for your own, because you're usually out doing this research for months. So you have to be okay with maybe being by yourself or not being in contact with your family. That wasn't that huge to me, but we didn't have Wi-Fi for like the first 3 weeks because something happened to, I mean, you're in the rainforest, something happened to it. So definitely doing all research, old school style, through looking through books, citing through books, of course, do your own spell check and all that. And then, I mean, you're in a third world country. So I had been in a third world country prior to that, so it wasn't like a huge shock. But at the same time, a lot of people take things for granted. You wash your clothes by hands, you hang it on the clothesline. Because it's so humid, nothing ever dries. And so you have that too. You're always like, I was always in wet clothes, but you're taking cold showers. You have the threats of the wildlife, of course, and all that to take into consideration. We ate a lot of the same similar stuff for the 3 or 4 weeks, not a whole lot of variety. For me, I don't eat, at the time I don't think I was eating meat either. I was a pescatarian still at the time. So taking that into consideration, I ate a lot of rice and beans and fruit. So just not having your luxuries all the time, of course, is always going to be something to consider. And it's just a different series of factors. But yeah, I decided, I was like, yeah, I don't know. Also, on a side note, I was like, this was also, I had a thing in my head because I was trying to prove myself wrong. I was like, well, I didn't want to work with the rainforest animals anywhere because New World primates are in South America. I was like, I don't want to be in South America anyway. I wanted to go to Africa. It'll be hotter. The conditions will be different. Looking back on it, I don't know if it'll be that much different. It would be different, but I was like, it still might be worse conditions or around the same, just in a different environment. But I was determined to try to talk myself. I was like, I don't care what anybody says. Like it just was this environment. It wasn't me. It wasn't like it's something I'm not capable of doing. But sometimes you have to realize like something's not for you. But it was a great experience. There's so many positive things I would take out of it. So I don't want to say that to say, oh, all this sounds negative. But you just have to be conscious of this when going there. Also, for people with natural hair, I was the only minority there at all. Like there was one other Hispanic girl, but she wasn't really with our program. Everybody else was white females except for one. And so what is not to be understood is, you can just wash your hair every day and go there. I couldn't take all my products there because, I only have so much luggage, but also because my hair never fully dried and you don't have access to always plug in a dryer, straighten iron, and all this stuff. At the time, I had put my hair in some faux locks before then, but you do not want to do something, for a key to anybody about to do a trip like that. You do not want to do a faux locks in a place where your hair doesn't dry, because if you know anything about locks or faux locks and they don't dry, they can get moldy or they can get smelly because your locks need to dry. So you don't always want to walk around with wet locks. So that was a big problem too. Like I said, very surface level and very specific to me. But yeah, if you worry about straight hair or humidity, that's out the door. It's always humid. It's always humid. So there's always stuff to consider. You don't have a whole sink to set up your hair wash day routine and all that stuff. I also learned that I was severely allergic to mosquitoes. I felt like I was getting 30 mosquito bites a day, and my arms and legs would swell, or all the mosquito bites would swell really bad. They have a different type of mosquito there. They don't care how many layers of clothes you got on. You always get bit by something.
I watch a lot of Naked and Afraid, and I'm like, I could never. Like even with clothes, like the way they, no, when they're in the jungles
Yeah.
and the rainforest, I'm like, nah. Me and my wife, we sit back and we like, no, we're good, we're good.
With clothes is a struggle. I couldn't imagine doing without clothes. Like,
Right.
um,
Um, any advice for minorities trying to get in this lane?
now I would say when I first started this was 2015 is when I graduated high school. So 2015 going into 2016. Things have definitely changed over the years, and now in 2023 and when I got in the field, I learned this more along the way. There's so many Black vets out there now, still minority, don't get me wrong, there's still minority, but there's more than it was when I first started. There are a lot of other Black professionals. You can go on Facebook or Instagram group, look at look up hashtag Black vets, Black animal lovers, or there's groups out there on Instagram that's trying to get other minorities involved, not Instagram, on Facebook, that's trying to get other minorities involved. So you can look for that. There are now a few more school programs that are involving animal things into it. But if you think you might be into that route, you can always find courses at your school like animal science, or find like biology programs, because regardless, if you're going into vet, you're going to need biology and chemistry. Like, take those courses and get interested. Find places to volunteer. That's the biggest thing. People hate volunteering because it's free labor, but if that's what you're interested, find places to volunteer. You don't have to have a college education to work at a sanctuary. I learned that early on too. And if it wasn't for me, I have to pay my bills. And I was like, this don't pay enough for me to want to work at this full time, because it is a full-time commitment. But you can go to sanctuaries, you can shadow people, and maybe work your way up to eventually you're working at a sanctuary from a volunteer to a person. There's a place out west that I thought about for primates. You can, I don't remember right now, but you can volunteer out there, and they take their volunteer interns and eventually turn them into employees. So if you know this is something you want to do, certain things, of course, research you need a degree for, and like vet and stuff. But if you just want to work with animals, a lot of people in these fields don't have degrees anymore just to work as a sanctuary, or like work at the zoo or rehab center. You can learn this on your own and just work your way up that way, or just get some experience and maybe open your own sanctuary. I did meet a kid that had their own, technically their parents helped them run it, but it was under their name and they started doing stuff around. So it became their own sanctuary. Another thing I found, if you don't want to do a whole college education, or you just need a class or something, what you could do, and I've done this when I thought I was going to be a rehabber, I took a local class at a community college. I think it was like 6 weeks. I did it 2 days a week or something like that. It was night classes, and they teach you everything about rehab. I went to go do a day with owls and hawks and falcons. They teach you what you need to rehab, and then at the end, you pretty much can be a rehabber. You can get the stuff that you need, keep it in your car. If you find, in that specific situation, they did birds of prey and raptors. So if you find like not a primate, if you find a birds of prey that's injured and you have the stuff to safely pick it up, you can transport it to the nearest center. So you can do stuff like that. That is volunteer. It is not paid. So a lot of older people do it. A lot of people that do it as a side job or a hobby, but you would not get paid for that. there are rehabbers that get paid, but a lot of the rehabilitation, if you're doing your house full time, feeding, especially during the spring, is a big thing during the spring for people to get into because so many animals are born during the spring. You'll get so many babies for squirrels and possums and stuff like that. You can do that at your home as long as it's like certain requirements, like having a backyard and stuff like that. But you can do that at your home, and anybody can do that. Like I said, or your parent can do it. Parent could do it, and then you be under them and helping them. But those do not pay. Just be aware of that. They don't pay. So that's purely out of the love and joy of your heart.
All right. I got two more questions.
All right.
First, what categorizes something as a bird of prey?
So they are large birds that eat other small animals or other birds. Like when I say birds of prey, hawks, eagles, owls, falcons. Am I missing anybody? Eagles are protected though, but a lot of the eagles are protected, like the bald eagle and everything. So not everybody can pick those up. But yeah, all those are birds of prey. So when you think of your big scary birds that swoop down and get the other animals, that's usually birds of prey.
Roger that. And where can we find you? Where can we find your podcast?
So you can find me on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, iHeartMedia, any of the major platforms. You can find at Wildlife Wonders with an S. It's with an S, plural. Podcast, all one word. That is the YouTube. That is the Instagram. I'm working on a Facebook page, but right now we're doing management. And that's pretty much everywhere you can find me. If you want to find me personally outside of this or outside of that space, Sari_tag is my Instagram name. You can find all my other stuff there as far as the other stuff I do, like food reviews, my modeling content stuff. But yeah, everything else is Wildlife Wonders Podcast, one word, or on YouTube, of course, separated, but it's still Wildlife Wonders Podcast.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining the lineup of Oyster Ninja Podcast.
Thank you.
I know you were a little worried at first about coming on here. Like, what? I'm not talking about oysters, really.
But I don't know anything about oysters.
You're not the only one though. Like a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't really know anything about oysters. Well, I probably know that. Okay, I
Yeah.
just want to talk to you about what you know about. And but no, I appreciate you for um, being a person of color in the industry and educating people. And I mean, just the things you were talking about today on this show, about even having being on government assistance is not a excuse not to be educated. Like
Yeah.
there are ways out there where if you have the will, there is a way.
Yep.
So thank you for putting that out there. And I think this is gonna be a good one. I really do. So
I think
thank
so
you.
too. Thank you.